Throughout the 1930s, until the end of the Holocaust and World War II, Nazi German officials threatened and destroyed the freedoms, humanity, and lives of Jews and other groups living under their control. One critical step in the Nazis' persecution of Jews was putting false ideas about race into official German law. How did they do it? The Nuremberg Race Laws. After Nazi leader Adolf Hitler was named German Chancellor in January 1933, his regime began to use the law to carry out their agenda. Nazi ideology falsely claimed that Jews belonged to a separate and inferior race. The Nazis saw Jews as an enemy and threat to German society. Enacted in 1935, the Nuremberg Race Laws were one of the first steps towards legalizing this false Nazi ideology. There were two laws: the Reich Citizenship Law and the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. The first of the two laws, the Reich Citizenship Law, defined a citizen as a person who is of German or related blood. German Jews were no longer considered citizens. The Nazis declared that people with 3 or 4 grandparents born into the Jewish religious community were Jews. The second of the Nuremberg Race Laws was the Law for the Protection of German Blood and German Honor. It built on the new definition of citizens and banned what the Nazis viewed as race mixing. Future marriages and sexual relations between Jews and people of German or related blood were now illegal. The Nazis believed that such relationships were dangerous because they led to so-called mixed-race children. According to the Nazis, these children and their descendants undermined the purity of the German race. Those violating the law could be punished with prison time. While the Nazis saw Jews as the priority enemy, they also targeted other groups for persecution, including Roma and Black people. The Nuremberg Race Laws were an important step in the Nazi regime's process of isolating and excluding Jews and other groups from the rest of German society. In the years that followed, they enacted more and more anti-Jewish laws. This systematic approach led to the murder of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. From their rise to power to the murder of 6 million European Jews in the Holocaust, the Nazis relied on a powerful weapon: propaganda. Propaganda is biased information designed to shape public opinion and behavior. Adolf Hitler and other Nazi leaders were skilled propagandists who used many techniques to spread their messages. The Nazis relied upon propaganda to create a society where only Germans they considered racially pure belonged. Jews and other groups were excluded. After Hitler became chancellor in 1933, the Nazis started to take control of the media. They shut down independent newspapers and seized authority over radio, film, newsreels, theater, and music productions. Soon, the Nazis controlled almost all media accessible to the German population and used this power to spread propaganda in different ways. They utilized symbols like the swastika to promote political allegiance, nationalism, and Nazi ideology. Hitler designed the Nazi flag in 1920 and transformed it into the trademark of the Nazi Party. It became a part of everyday life and a potent political tool. They used slogans that simplified their messages to just a few memorable words or phrases, like calling Jews the scourge of humanity, or recruiting children to join the Hitler Youth. The Nazis updated their propaganda strategies to improve effectiveness and appeal to a wider range of people. Beginning in the 1920s, radio emerged as a worldwide sensation. For the first time, people could listen to news and entertainment in their homes. The Nazis quickly recognized the power of this new medium. They commissioned a low-cost radio called the People's Receiver, allowing millions more Germans to buy radios and listen from their own homes. Under Nazi rule, all German films would become subject to censorship and control. They produced films to demonize Jews by comparing them to rats and drawing on other negative stereotypes, while also portraying the supposedly ideal pure German. The Nazis used all of these propaganda techniques to exclude, demonize, and isolate Jewish people. They showed the world how dangerous propaganda could be in the hands of experts.
Ein kleines Dorf in Ungarn nirgendwo, da sieht Marika nachts am Radio. Verzaubert lauscht sie einer Melodie und wer sie spielt, der ist das Glück für sie. Doch eines Nachts sagt sie den Sternen, ich muss den Geiger kennenlernen. An der Donau steht Marika, denn sie will nach Budapest. Mit dem Dampfer zu dem Geiger, der sie nicht mehr schlafen lässt. Sie hat ihn oft gehört im Radio und möchte ihn endlich einmal sehen. Marika will dem König aller Geiger.
Germany, 1933. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, seizes control of the democratic Weimar Republic. The country is transformed overnight into a police state. Basic rights and freedoms are revoked. The first concentration camps are established, imprisoning political opponents, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Hitler creates a propaganda campaign based on the purity and superiority of the Aryan race. His racist ideology infiltrated every level of society. Jews are labeled as impure and are excluded from mainstream German society. They are randomly attacked in the streets. The Nazi Party calls for a boycott of Jewish stores and businesses. On September 15, 1935, the German parliament passed the Nuremberg race laws. The Nuremberg laws makes racism, and in particular anti-Semitism, legal in Germany. German Jews are stripped of their citizenship. Relations between Jews and non-Jews are forbidden. Jews cannot employ non-Jews.
Before the Nazis came to power, there was really no Jewish problem. If you're looking at the Jewish world in 1933, and you're looking at Britain, you look at France, you look at Germany, and you ask what would be the best place to live as a Jew, you would say Germany.
What we understand in the 30s, this split between the Jews and the German society hadn't begun in terms of a psyche of us and them.
Following World War I, a democratic regime was instituted in Germany, the Weimar Republic, which had perhaps the most liberal democratic constitution in the world.
Germany had given Jews political rights as citizens, and the Jews had jumped into that with both feet. They became very active politically. They joined political parties. Jews became disproportionately influential in the professions. They had more doctors, they had more lawyers, they had more judges, they had more journalists, they had more university professors than their 1% of the population would have suggested.
But the Weimar Republic and the constitution that created it were extremely unpopular in Germany. In the elections that brought the Nazis to power, these were the elections of November 1932, 58% of the German electorate, people of their own free will, voted against democracy in the last more or less free election in Germany.
Immediately after Hitler came to power in January 1933, the Enabling Act was passed, which gave the right to Hitler's cabinet to enact laws without the consent of Parliament. This gave Hitler dictatorial powers over the entire country.
By the time that the laws were passed, Germany was no longer even remotely resembling a democratic society.
What happened in 1935 was that there were many so-called spontaneous violent acts against Jews.
Hitler allowed the brown shirts, which was his thuggery, his militia, to go out into the streets and cause street violence. They would beat up Jews, they would rob Jews, they would stand in front of shops owned by Jews, they would break those windows, they would rape young Jewish girls.
The country was drifting into anarchy.
Nazis realized that in order to create a new reality for the Jews in Germany, it would have to be through legislation.
The Nuremberg Laws were drafted in a matter of hours, and they were presented the next day at the 1935 annual Nazi rally in Nuremberg.
In a sense, these laws came as a calming moment of that violence against the Jews and pressure on the Jews, and ostensibly came to organize society so that Jews and everyone else in Germany knows who everybody is and where they belong. There are the Aryans, all those people in Germany who are citizens of Germany, and there are the Jews who are not citizens but have a right to live in Germany under certain circumscribed circumstances.
One of the geniuses of this policy, because it's actually fusing something that's rational, legislation, with something irrational, which is the xenophobia.
These laws set out to deny Jews in Germany their citizenship, regardless of how long a particular Jew had been living in Germany or that person's family. And the laws ultimately defined citizenship in Germany based upon who a person's grandparents were by race. And therefore, anyone who had even one Jewish grandparent could no longer be a citizen of Germany.
Sexual relations between Jews and Aryans was considered a crime, because sexual relations between Jews and Aryans obviously violated racial principles and would produce children who would be in some way carriers of the Jewish gene.
The Nuremberg laws separate the Jews out of German society, and with that a sense of indifference is engendered, which ultimately would lead to, a sense of indifference to the Jewish fate at later stages of Nazi policy.
The idea that Jews are not equal to the rest of the German people, the idea that Jews should not be equal citizens, the idea that there should be a social separation legislated in Germany seemed to be at least unobjectionable to almost everybody else in Germany, and no one spoke out.
The very famous case is of a lawyer who, one of his clients was a Jewish owner of a department store. And this lawyer goes to the police office where his client is held, and he protests. And immediately is beaten up by SS men. And then he's paraded through the streets. He's carrying a big sign that says, "I'm a lawyer and I will never complain to the police again." No other lawyer went then to the police to basically argue on his behalf, and he didn't do it after that anymore.
The Nuremberg crimes were really the crimes of the Nuremberg elites, judges and lawyers and faith leaders and educators. The society that should have been engaged in protesting against Nuremberg racism were the elites and the society that in effect were promulgating this hate and promulgating these laws.
When the Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935, they were not passed, as far as almost all historians now agree, with any intention or any vision of the future that there would be a murder of all the Jews, an attempt at what the Nazis later called the final solution to the Jewish question. However, these laws ultimately served as the foundation for determining all policies against Jews, and that included, as time went on, also killing the Jews.
For years, the Nazis had spread the lie that Jews were to blame for Germany's decline. Now their policy was to stamp out that Jewish influence. Books by Jewish authors were burnt. Jewish civil servants, lawyers, doctors lost their jobs and suffered public humiliation. For Germany's Jewish community, the basic right just to live and enjoy life like anyone else was suddenly under threat. They were ordinary Germans through and through, but now they'd been picked out, branded un-German, an enemy within. Why? Deep down it was jealousy. The Jewish community was successful. Many German doctors, lawyers, bankers were Jewish. The Nazis twisted this success. In their propaganda, they said it was based on selfishness, that the Jews had got rich at Germany's expense. It was all lies, but the propaganda was powerful, and it fed old hatreds, born long before the Nazis came to power.
When my mother married a Jew, her family would have no more to do with her. They turned her away. Their own daughter. What had a Jew done to them? I don't know. They saw with blinkers, and so they never got to know my father's family. They were wonderful people, so full of life. And then when my turn came, just like my mother, I married a Jew. They were my community. Siegfried. This is his photograph.
Is he...
dead? No, he is in England. I think. I have heard nothing for so long.
Their stormtroopers were now protected by the government, and one of their favorite excesses, the persecution of Germany's Jews, was now government policy. There were arrests, beatings. Stormtroopers urged people not to shop in Jewish stores.
Seems so long ago. I remember the shock. Yes, but this explosion of hatred, it was so overdramatic, I couldn't take it seriously. I remember I was working in the prison services. I was a social worker. I had my hat on. I was on my way out the door, and the director phoned, and he said, "You shouldn't come to work anymore." And I asked, why? And he said, "You wouldn't be safe here anymore." And I remember thinking that was so funny. I mean, of all places, how could I not be safe in a prison?
Was he a Nazi?
I suppose so. I think that deep down many Germans disliked the Jews, but they kept their hatred bottled up, and then in 1933, pop, the lid came off.
Purity of German blood. The Nazis divided people into racial types. They said Germans were descended from the Aryan race. Pure Aryan Germans could be recognized from their blonde hair and blue eyes. It was all a fantasy, but the fantasy was dressed up as science. Germans were being taught to think of other races as somehow less than perfect. And the German people bought the lie. Signs cropped up. Jews not wanted here. With the Nuremberg decrees, this discrimination was set down in stone. German Jews lost their citizenship. They lost the right even to call themselves German.
And yet, you know, the funny thing, how losing your citizenship hurts less than those silly, petty details. Not being able to sit down in a tram. Public benches painted bright yellow, set aside for Jews only. I would not have sat there for my soul.
In any case, you're not Jewish.
No, but I'm not Aryan either. Oh. Half and half. It was so confusing. They call it a science. They like to think it's so clear-cut, but... I had a friend. He was Jewish, but tall and blonde. I went with him past a restaurant. There was a big sign, "Jews keep out." And he said, "Watch this." And he strolled in, and he flirted with the waitress. And when she brought his food, he said, "Oh, sorry, I didn't see the sign." And he just left, leaving her shaking in anger. After Kristallnacht, they took him away. The Nazis never liked to be mocked.
Ein kleines Dorf in Ungarn nirgendwo, da lief Marika nachts am Radio.
As things become difficult for Jews in Germany from 1933 to 1935, the Geissener family story begins, but first some background. Goodbye Berlin is the paternal story of Jeffrey B. Geissener, father's family in Nazi Berlin, and my father, Rolf Geissener's escape from Nazi Berlin in 1935 at only the age of 15. It is also the story of the Hadassah Aliyot Kindertransport to Palestine from Nazi Berlin.
This is how it started. Germany 1933. Hitler comes to power. Brutality, violence, the burning of holy Jewish books. And later, the burning of Jews.
The proclamation, while stormtroopers guarded the doors, Henrietta Zold stood in a Berlin meeting hall. She had come in the name of Youth Aliyah, the youth immigration movement that had begun to move the menaced children of Europe to Palestine. She talked to men and women whose destinies were already measured in blood. She told them that their children would not die. Sorrowful Jews crowded around her, begging for news of boys and girls they had sent to Palestine at the risk of their lives. They wanted to know if their sons and daughters were safe and well. Henrietta Zold comforted each of them. Her face and voice were their only hope when nothing remained but terror. She went from there blessed by their gratitude. She knew that she would never see them again. Some of those children lived. The first boatload arrived at the port of Haifa in February 1934. There were 44 boys and girls facing a strange and frightening adventure. None was older than 17. They had left behind them the only friends they knew. Henrietta Zold met them at the harbor. In her presence, they found safety. In her eyes, they saw the eyes of the mothers they would not meet again in their lifetime. I should have had children, many children, Henrietta Zold had once told her friends. And here they were. She gave them life and all that goes with a mother's gift. She was with them in joy and in sorrow. She shared their work and their play. Their celebrations were hers. Their victories were her reward. She asked no other. In 1935, she had stood before a Zionist Congress in Lucerne, reporting on Youth Aliyah. In that same year, she went to America.
We have already brought out of Germany into Palestine 1,000 boys and girls between the ages of 15 and 17, from a land in which they could not attend school into a land in which they have fine educational opportunities, from a land in which they cannot pursue trades into a land in which they are taught trades, from a land in which they are repressed into a land in which they are given the opportunity of full self-expression. Palestine is, in that respect, comparable to America, to the United States. As in the United States, our young people look forward to a life of usefulness, so in Palestine, these young people repressed in Germany are able to make for themselves a sphere of usefulness, a sphere of noble city.
Out of this was born Youth Aliyah. Get the children out at least. Bring them to Palestine, Israel, the Jewish national home, where they can grow up free, independent, and shake off the grim nightmare of persecution. The first group to escape from Germany arrives on the shores of the Holy Land.
Rolf Geisner, only age 15 and just 2 months after the September 15th, 1935 Nuremberg laws were passed, was denied schooling and all of his rights as a Jew. Rolf and his parents saw what was developing in Berlin under Hitler's anti-Jewish state and were desperate to have Rolf escape from Nazi Berlin. His mother insisted that Rolf's father, Alfred, place Rolf on the year's last Hadassah Youth Aliyah Kindertransport, leaving Berlin in December 1935. As a decorated soldier of distinction in World War I, Rolf shared a memory of going with his father to get papers to leave Germany. He was able to walk ahead of everyone in line because his father had served in World War I with distinction. Until his 91st birthday, he remembers with emotion, walking hand in hand with his father past all the Jews in line to go to the head of line to obtain his papers, and secured Rolf's official papers to leave Berlin. He and 100 other Berliner teenagers went by train to Italy and boarded the ship Galilea to Port Haifa, Palestine. Rolf was one of the first Hadassah youth transports offered desperately to get Jewish youth out of Germany. The 100 teenagers arrived in February 1936.
Ein kleines Dorf in Ungarn nirgendwo, da sitzt Marika nachts am Radio. Verzaubert lauscht sie einer Melodie und wer sie spielt, der ist das Glück für sie. Doch eines Nachts sagt sie den Sternen,
Henrietta Zold is there to meet them. She it was, together with Recha Freier, who conceived the idea of rescue and emigration to Israel. The youngsters are taken to their new homes in pioneer farm villages throughout the country.
The school, which opened in early 1937 with an enrollment of 60, later increased to 150, provided a thorough 3-year course in carpentry, forge, lock, and tinsmithing. Its graduates gave excellent accounts of themselves in the army, settlements, and workshops. Anticipating that the first few years of plenty would be consumed by later years of famine, Hadassah began to supply clothing and equipment. The European committees, particularly those in Sweden and Holland, dispatched vast quantities of garments until the war halted such operations. For Henrietta Zold, promptly outfitting newcomers with new clothes, not hand-me-downs or cast-offs, was a principle. It symbolized the complete break with refugeeism, its herding and harassment, and the recognition of each child as an individual entitled to self-esteem and the respect of others. Dressed like a Sabra, native-born Palestinian, he felt like a Sabra, a builder in Zion who was needed and belonged to a proud and stalwart people. Clothes helped make the man. Youth Aliyah youngsters were placed on kibbutzim for 2 years to learn farming and Hebrew. Dad's group was called Hashomer Hatzair. He was in trade school for 3 to 4 years. Background on Hashomer Hatzair. Hashomer Hatzair came into being as a result of the merger of 2 groups, Hashomer, the Guard, a Zionist scouting group, and Zeirei Zion, the Youth of Zion, which was an ideological circle that studied Zionism, socialism, and Jewish history. Hashomer Hatzair is the oldest Zionist youth movement that is still in existence. Initially Marxist-Zionist, the movement was influenced by the ideas of Ber Borochov and Gustav Winnekin, Baden-Powell, and the German Wandervogel movement. Hashomer Hatzair believed liberating Jewish youth could be accomplished by Aliyah immigration to Palestine and living in kibbutzim. After the war, the movement spread to Jewish communities worldwide as a scouting movement.
This is Jeffrey B. Giesener, founder of the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance and Stand Against Hate International Communities. I created this film to honor the Hadassah Aliyot Kindertransport program. It was designed to get Jewish youth out of Nazi Berlin. It was the instrumental reason my father was able to escape Nazi Berlin in 1935 at the young age of 15. He began his teenage years in Haifa, Palestine, because of the Hadassah Aliyot Kindertransport program.
Before we get started, a little bit of vocabulary, which will make things a little easier to understand, and I won't have to stop in the middle and explain. 2 German words which become important in this topic. The first is Reichsvertretung. That is the Reich's representation of German Jews. That was what we would call the Kehillah, or a kind of a Judenrat. It was a representative body representing all the Jewish communities in Germany. After Kristallnacht, it was reorganized, and there was a change of name. And the new name is Reichsvereinigung, which means the Association of Jews in Germany. Notice the subtle difference. It's no longer German Jews, but it's Jews in Germany. And that's reflective of the change of status of Jews in Germany. And so now we go to the Youth Aliyah in Germany. Before the rise of Nazis to power, and even in the first few years of Nazi domination, most German Jews simply didn't believe that the Nazis would last. Hitler seemed like a buffoon, like a crazy man, and people thought that it was an aberration of history that would very soon pass. One of the few German Jews who quickly saw the Nazis as an existential threat was Recha Freier. Wife of a congregational rabbi in Berlin, she saw as early as 1932 that there was no future for Jewish youth in Germany. After trying in vain to secure jobs for a group of young Jews who had finished their schooling, she formulated a bold plan. And it's just something that came to her one night. She was inspired by this idea to create, as she said, a great and permanent movement for the transfer of Jewish youth from the diaspora to the Palestinian colonies, to enable them to live and to take root in the soil of their fatherland. Although German Jewish leaders of the Reichsvertretung were skeptical of this idea, this was something brand new, untested, untried. How do you send German youth to be agricultural colonists? No, send them to the university, teach them a trade, but to be agriculturists? Young German Jews, however, were enthusiastic. As Recha Freier said, on the very day the Nazis took office, 30th of January 1933, the Society for Youth Aliyah was established in Berlin, not without a lot of toil and trouble on the part of Recha Freier. She not only invented the idea, but she invented the organization. Single-handedly, she drummed up support, and she created an organization of people who supported her. In March 1933, Rabbi Leo Beck, who was the head of the Reichsvertretung, called all the leaders of Jewish communities to meet to discuss a program of action. It was their responsibility to oversee whatever happened to the Jews in Germany from the Jewish perspective. He told them, "We must face the reality of a Nazi-ruled Germany and endeavor to work out a twofold plan: emigration for young people and the maintenance of the cultural and spiritual life of the remaining Jewish community. So he agreed that they have to help the young people get out. And this, again, was contrary to the general opinion that Nazism was a passing phenomenon. Recha Fryer said, the idea of youth aliyah, based as it was in rooting young Jews in Palestine, was alien to the larger part of German Jewry and aroused an opposition. The idea of youth aliyah had first and foremost appealed to the youth of Eastern European Jewry, especially to those in youth movements. Their parents, who had previously been forced once or even twice to take up the staff of the Wanderer, were quick to grasp the significance of events. So German Jews living in Germany of Eastern European origin had the wandering Jew in their bones. They knew what it was to pick up and leave when things got very difficult. Whereas the German Jews who had been comfortable and rooted for generations did not have that instinct. The first group of youth aliyah left Berlin on October 12, 1932. It was a small group of perhaps 12 young people, and they got aliyah certificates from the director of the Ben Shemen Children's Village, and that's where they went. Fryer said they would pave the way for the liberation of the others. And then she went over the heads of all the Jewish organizations and went directly to the 18th Zionist Congress that met in August and September 1933. As a result of her bringing this idea to the Zionist Congress, Youth Aliyah became an official project of the World Zionist Organization. More groups of young people followed the first and left to Palestine and were dispersed there to cooperating youth villages, kibbutzim, moshavim, and agricultural schools. As the urgency of emigration from Germany grew, the demand for Palestine certificates for youth outstripped the supply. Does everybody know what a Palestine certificate is? No.
Okay.
The British controlled immigration to Palestine, and they limited it to 1,500 Jews a year at the request or the demand of the Arabs. At the Congress, they added a certain number of special certificates just for youth. So they weren't going to take jobs away, theoretically, from anybody. But even those certificates, the demand for the youth certificates quickly outstripped the supply of those that were available. Membership in Zionist youth organizations was growing rapidly, with many more applicants to Youth Aliyah. However, not all the applicants for Youth Aliyah were deemed sufficiently prepared for life in Palestine. It was not so simple to get a certificate for Youth Aliyah as it wasn't so simple to get a regular certificate. You had to come with your parents and be interviewed and tested on your knowledge of Hebrew, and they decided, is this person ready to live in the Yishuv? Does he or she have the skills? Is the person's personality suitable for communal life on a kibbutz, for example? So they didn't take everybody right away. Sometimes you had to wait your turn. And while they were waiting, leaders of Youth Aliyah saw this as an opportunity to educate German Jewish youth about Jewish and Zionist life. We're talking about a very assimilated population who didn't know very much, if anything, about Jewish life. But here they were being persecuted for being Jews, and so that aroused interest in what is this Jewish thing. So the leaders of Youth Aliyah saw this as an opportunity to educate them in response about Jewish life and Zionism. What is Zionism? That's something else that they had to learn. Hebrew. They gave them basic knowledge of the Hebrew language, and agricultural skills, because it makes no sense to send them to Palestine where they're going to work the land without any agricultural skills at all. In 1935, and this is still early in the story, in response to increased demand for Aliyah and in response to the dismissal of Jewish children from Germans' public schools, the Youth Aliyah broadened its project. A Youth Aliyah school was established in Berlin to give the youth a full year's training for life in Palestine. Hebrew was in the center of the curriculum. The main subjects were Jewish history, past and present, Zionism, the labor movement in Palestine, and science as far as it was connected to agriculture. In the midst of the daily degradation of life under the Nazis, and remember, these are children who were expelled from their schools and rejected by the friends with whom they had grown up. There was a crisis among young people because their whole environment had fallen apart around them. And the Youth Aliyah School became a haven for them of comfortable life in Judaism and teaching them its values and its worth. So children who were subjected to the destruction of morale and self-respect went to this school, which was permeated with the spirit of its first head, Franz Ohlendorf. He was a German Jew, a scientist, a Zionist, and a humanist. He had gone to Palestine in 1934, but he was persuaded to return to Germany to lead the Youth Aliyah School in Berlin that would prepare young people for Palestine. And it was understood that this was temporary, but he was uniquely qualified to head up this school. As the demands for Aliyah grew, it became apparent that all youth, regardless of their background, would benefit from preparatory training before their Aliyah. By 1935, Youth Aliyah had two schools in Berlin. One was affiliated with the Hechalutz Zionist youth movement. The other became known as the Youth Aliyah School in Berlin. In addition, the Zionist youth movements established 35 hachsharot, training farms, to accommodate those who were unable to emigrate immediately. These schools and farms accommodated Jewish children and youth who were dismissed from German public schools or who left them in order to escape from the daily humiliation and persecution they were experiencing. Family. They gathered around a round table. On the white tablecloth was a pair of lit candles. The candles are on the either side of the picture of Herzl. Again, I apologize for the quality of the photographs, but you use what's available. 2 rolls instead of chalot. Some postcards with images of Eretz Yisrael and a Jewish flag. You can see the stripe there. That activity was not only another, and you see the greenery, a branch of a tree or of a bush, to symbolize Shavuot. That activity was not only another tie to tradition, but it had the added symbolism of starting the counting of the Omer. And they decided to meet every day during the counting of the Omer to count together. So that was another symbol, the symbolism of counting the days until they hoped they would be free. For 7 weeks, whoever could get there met every night at dark for 15 minutes only, changing their meeting place frequently, in a public park, under the bridge in the zoo, wherever it was deemed feasible. They stood in a circle, holding hands, humming Hineni Muchanu Zaman. You know what that is, right? It's the beginning of the Seder Sfirat HaOmer. That's the first sentence. Schwerzens would announce the day of the Omer. They would repeat it quietly, and then add the last sentence of Seder Sfirat HaOmer, Sheyibaneh Beit HaMikdash. So this is very symbolic, very heavy laden with Jewish hopes and aspirations, and particularly relevant to their situation. In September 1943, one more of their number was arrested and held in the Gestapo prison, where he was tortured for information. The one who was arrested is the very tall fellow he's the third one in the middle of the ones who were standing. They got a smuggled note from him, assuring them that he did not reveal anything, and that was the last they heard from him before he was deported to Auschwitz. And obviously he did not reveal any information because nobody came after the rest of them. This loss cast a pall over their Rosh Hashanah observance. It happened in early September. Schwerzens, in his memoir, details every single Yom Tov that they celebrated together. He says not a word about that Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, he just couldn't talk about it. He does describe Yom Kippur, though. On Yom Kippur, 1943, they met in the cellar of the Littman family, where they stood for all the prayers, which was said with tremendous emotion and feeling of identification with all of Klal Yisrael throughout history. Recalling the loss of loved ones was particularly painful. Schwerzens's escape from Germany was meant to be a trial run for the escape of others of the Chug Chalutzi. In February 1944, with the help of Christian contacts made by Edith Wolf, he was outfitted with the documents and uniform of an officer in the Nazi Air Force. No one knew if his escape would succeed and if it could open the way for others. Before he left, he did a very dangerous thing. He copied crucial notes that he had written about the work of Youth Aliyah and the Chug Chalutzi into a small notebook, and he selected some of the photographs that documented their activities, like this photograph. These he put in a folder that he kept with him. If he had been found with that folder, it would have been terribly incriminating for the whole group. There's no explanation as to why he did it. He and a Jewish woman who had the documents of a Nazi Air Force telegraph operator crossed the border with the help of guides who were paid by their Christian friends. Before they parted from their guides, they turned their false documents over to them, hoping that others would use them successfully. Upon their arrival in Switzerland, they said the Shehechianu. They were arrested as soon as they crossed the border into Switzerland. That was normal procedure in Switzerland. The Swiss police would arrest people who crossed the border. They didn't send them back. That only happened at the beginning of the war. And they kept them in internment camps. Schwerzens immediately got in touch with the head of the Jewish Agency office in Switzerland, who had been sending money to the Chug Chalutzi with these couriers. And the head of the Jewish Agency office in Switzerland, Natan Schwalbe, immediately took him out of the camp and asked him to start a Jewish scout movement in Switzerland, which Schwerzens did, and he had headed up that scouts movement for 10 years until he made Aliyah. Unfortunately, Schwerzens's escape route was not used successfully by the others. The next two who tried were caught, and their Christian helpers were discovered as well. One was executed, another was imprisoned, and it was clear that no more escapes would be feasible. Nevertheless, contact with the group in Berlin was not severed. Using couriers, Natan Schwalbe managed to maintain contact with the group, sending money that helped them live. Even members of the group who were arrested eventually were not killed. Now we're talking about 1944. Berlin under almost constant bombardment, municipal and government activities in disarray, and even the deportations from Berlin had stopped already. So anyone who was arrested at that point was just kept in jail, and almost all of them survived until liberation. Schwerzens reported in his memoir that all the members of the group who were alive when he left survived. After the war, when immigration was the priority, some gained entry to the United States, and 6 others settled in Israel, including Edith Wolf, who had spent more than the last year of the war in prison. She also arrived in Israel and participated with Schwerzens in writing his memoir. The educational philosophy of the Youth Aliyah schools did not develop in a vacuum. It reflects the best Jewish values, as well as the liberal, social, and ethical philosophy of the time, heavily influenced by John Dewey and Martin Buber, for example. They saw the school as an extension of civil society. They see students and teachers as members of a learning community, where each participant is encouraged to exercise self-awareness, to own the ethical and academic material and make it part of his life. It's where the academic material comes alive in the lives of the students. And if you think back to the experiences that you had in school when you were in school, and what was most meaningful and what became part of your life, those are the kinds of activities that were stressed at the Youth Aliyah school so that it would have a lasting influence on a person's life. Just as Judaism teaches individual responsibility for self and community, this approach teaches both self-discipline and responsibility for the community. These lessons were tested in the Holocaust under the most stressful conditions: underground life, arrest, deportation, and worse. These lessons are timeless and universal, and as educators or as parents, grandparents, we can learn a lot about how this approach can strengthen both character and community. Thank you.
The Youth Aliyah program allowing Jewish teenagers to escape Nazi Berlin. After my mom of blessed memory passed in 2011, my sister Sherry moved my father up to live in Andover, Massachusetts, where she was living. He was also in declining health and lived in an assisted living residence close to my sister. As you know, in 2020, we went through a global pandemic, and I was looking for a project to keep me busy. It was also during this time that I founded the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance International Community. The community now has over 30,000 worldwide members, mostly second and third generation survivors from around the world. You can find us on Facebook groups and on the web, jchrnow.com. Our international website. Everything is Jewish every day. For all my growing up years, I believed that my paternal grandfather, Alfred Giesener, and my father had zero contact or any connection to each other since my dad's parents divorced in 1929 after 10 years of marriage. Throughout my lifetime, my dad never spoke well of his father. He was very resentful of how he destroyed the household environment by betting all of his weekly salary on the ponies. Often, the betting left his mom, brother, and himself without enough food to live on. Dad certainly loved his mother, the matriarch of the family, and I heard only good things about my grandmother, who survived the Holocaust. Kate Giesener escaped Berlin in 1939, just before the war erupted, taking herself and her youngest son, Horst, to Manchester, England. In Manchester, my grandmother was a nanny for a Jewish family. Grandmother was a knowledgeable professional who managed her father's prestigious dental surgical office in Berlin. My uncle Horst Spielberg's Shoah recording is streaming on the community's YouTube, Jewish Culture YouTube streaming site under Horst Gilbert. He changed his name from Giesener to Gilbert when he arrived in England in 1939 to avoid German negatives and anti-Semitism against German Jews associated with the war. What I heard from my father and grandmother about Alfred scarred me about him for life, so much so that my dad instilled such a fear of betting and gambling in me that, to this day, I can't bet a quarter on a slot machine or go to any gambling venue or talk about inherited trauma. My grandfather Alfred was murdered at Terezin in May 1943 and stripped of all his assets by the Nazis. He was forced to move into several small Jewish ghettos in Berlin from 1936 to 1942. Eventually, he was deported to Terezin in October 1943 by the Nazis in the final liquidation of Jews from Berlin and from all around Germany. To repeat, during the start of the 2020 global pandemic, I was looking for a project while in isolation, and I remembered something about these 16 letters and the fact that they had yet to be translated. This was also the time when I was creating the Jewish Culture and Holocaust Remembrance International Community. It was very helpful for me to get translation recommendations from members of our community. This led me directly to the Leo Baeck Institute of New York City and to Michael Simonson, their Director of Translation Services at the time. Michael offered to help us translate these letters one by one. It took months to receive all of the translations, and we could then process the totality of the information and the meaning of the letters. Due to the pandemic, it took nearly a year as most of their translators, who were peers of my father's age, were only working from home intermittently. But as each letter came back to us, it translated new and important facts, nuance, and certainly a new appreciation for my grandfather, and a relationship I never knew existed between Alfred and his son. The onion of this relationship was being peeled back. I hope that you will now see the same in the translation of these letters, which are presented one after another with a date stamp. Some of the letters have been combined here for editing purposes and time, but you will, as my sister and I have come to cherish these letters and what they said about my father, Rolf Giesener, his brother Horst, and his father, Alfred Giesener. I hope you enjoy them, and perhaps you too will glean what it was like for an older, decorated World War I Jewish soldier of distinction to have lived through this horrid period in our Jewish history. It is all in these letters from 1936 to 1939. The last letter stopped in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939. Since Palestine was a British mandate, Palestine was also considered an enemy German state. Also, from my research, these letters were most likely opened and read by Nazis to make sure no spying was happening. One thing is very clear from the writing, and what surprised me is that my dad tried frequently to get his father to come to Palestine. Alfred made one excuse after another for not being able to reach. Again, he was murdered in Terezin. Enjoy the Alfred letters. No letters from my dad to Alfred are found, but Alfred alludes to them in his letter.
Berlin, July 4th, 1937. Alfred to his son, Rolf, in Haifa, Palestine. Dear Rolf, through Horst, I heard that you are well again. What did you do during your vacation? I talked here to Norma, and she said that she unfortunately has not yet spoken to you, but also likes it there. Norma talked me into coming there. Perhaps I will think it over and come in the fall. With Horst, I was together every week. Now he is in Lviv, Ukraine, recuperating from his school and the heat. What are you doing for work there? Are you working as a carpenter or as farmer? You will soon get to be financially independent. Can you not get your German citizenship now? When you are drafted, it is easily possible that your passport will not be extended and that you could absolve your military obligation here. Therefore, it would be very good if there is a possibility that you could become citizen there, that you try for it in due time. As Horst wrote to me, your passport expired in July, and it must be renewed. I was at the Presidium, a kind of administrative office, and there Horst was told the passport has to be extended from there. From Germany, it can't be done. Only from Palestine. You must go to the present German consul, and they will send it, the application, paperwork, here. The consul must first certify that you are not a political suspect. Alfred states that if Rolf is drafted into the Haganah, he might not have his German citizenship renewed, so he should renew it now if he can. He has to apply for the renewal at the German consul, where he is now, Palestine, and they send the paperwork to Germany, which then grants German citizenship. As I do not know what the working of the permission is supposed to say, which, according to Horst, I am to send in, I am writing my signature on the other page. You can then write the permission above it. Hopefully, it works. In other words, regarding the German citizenship renewal, his signature is required, but he isn't with Horst, so he is sending his signature on a separate page. Horst will then write the actual body of the permission request, and it will have his father's signature. I continue to wish you all the best. With best regards, your Papa. Schöneberg, January 13th, 1938. Letter number 1. Alfred to his son Rolf in Berlin. To Palestine. Dear Rolf, thank you so much for your letter and your good wishes on my birthday. I see from your letters that you are continuing to do well in Haifa, Palestine, and that you are in good health, but that you are suffering from the same malady we are all suffering here, lack of money. Still, in this letter, I am enclosing 10 marks, and am sure you have good use for it. I don't think my trip will happen. I am just too old to resettle to Palestine. I also have all the other health issues from which I am suffering. For example, my eyes have a problem, so I have a lot of difficulty and cannot even see or read what I am writing. Has Dr. Kopstein moved there in the meantime? If so, what is he doing there? Last week I went with Horst to the Scala. The Scala was a large theater cabaret in Berlin that existed since the 1920s. It had performances, acrobatic and animal acts, chorus girl dancing, singers, etc. As you will remember it, the performances are still crazy, wacky. But now, dear Rolf, to the main purpose of this letter, to wish you all the best for your birthday on January 28th. It's the first one that you are celebrating all alone, and in a strange land, to boot. Please take good care of yourself and stay well and optimistic. Perhaps the 10 marks will help to make the day a little more festive. Again, all the best for you in this new year. And please let me know that you received the 10 mark and that you will buy yourself something nice with it. With love, your Papa. Berlin, July 10th, 39. Dear Rolf, as the time is up, I want to write a few lines to you even though I can't report much news. Starting on Tuesday, there will only be reply coupons here in Schöneberg, and everyone should buy them at their post office. So I have to write today, like certified mail receipts, but for packages. Tomorrow I have to be at the post office at 8 o'clock. Otherwise, I won't get one as the people will line up. Many Jews live here in Berlin, and they all have relatives abroad now, which is why there is a particular shortage of coupons. Ever since Cuba is closed, emigration has almost come to a halt here. Extraordinarily, many people have emigrated to Shanghai. Everyone who couldn't go somewhere else went there, but now going there is also slowing down. The German shipping companies are sold out until the end of the year, and the others request foreign exchange, but no one has them. Therefore, it is over now with Shanghai too. Finally, it seems things are proceeding with Eretz, Israel, again. Presumably, a large number of youths should go there via Aliyah. Well, it is about time. According to the latest regulations, Jews are not allowed to. Jews can no longer go to school with Aryans anymore. Therefore, it is very hard for children in small cities now, who often travel far to school. But is it also hard in Berlin? As the federal state is not providing any grants for Jewish schools anymore, many of them will presumably close down, and the other schools will get overcrowded. It is about time that the children get to Eretz. Due to the closure of Jewish shops, many Jews are impoverished and receive welfare support. From now on, the municipalities need to help the poor financially, but if they cannot, It will get very sinister for the people. However, luckily, the Jews are getting work now because there is a shortage of workers here. The Jews will now be employed for building canals, etc. In Kaulsdorf, close to B, a huge lake is being created. Therefore, hundreds are being employed, etc. Individual factories are also employing Jews. But as they are not allowed to work together with Aryans, the Jews are working the night shifts. It is not bad because it is mostly people of 50 to 70 years who cannot sleep well anymore, especially because, as Jews, of the troubles they face. Now they are free all day. Many women also work peeling potatoes, etc. Like this, the families can live well, and they are fortunate. They can't quarrel often because they only speak to each other on Saturday afternoons and Sundays. That is because the women are working during the day. The men at night. Love your papa. Berlin, July 21st, 1939. Dear Rolf, Max from Czechoslovakia finally got his entry permit to Eretz and has to leave at the end of September. Makels has sold his house but still has not received any money. He hopes that his departure will resolve this matter as he still has to buy clothes for himself. Michael's got a guarantee of £1,500 from Iran. His 2 children are still in Holland, and he hopes that they will be able to follow soon. Michael's is a trained tailor and cutter, and he hopes that he will be able to pick up his former craft. The equipment is also different now. It is only allowed to take necessary things. For a purchased item, a special export duty has to be paid, and a list of the things one brings with them has to be submitted and reviewed weeks in advance. I now want to know immediately if you want or need a pullover or a cardigan or shoes, low shoes, high leather, or linen shoes, or something else. You then have to tell me the size. Hopefully the package will arrive by now. If not, I would order another copy and submit it. Max could bring the items with him if it doesn't come again. As a Jew, one is not allowed to send parcels or other things anymore. Lately, the sender has to be written on every parcel so it can be checked that no Jews have sent something. As a result of the blockage of the exchange embargo, etc., many letters are being opened now. Therefore, when you are writing, let me know what you, illegible, from Uncle Paul in the United States, and don't forget to state the size, etc. I will then write to him and try to get it to you. I will let you know when and where Max. Czechoslovakia is going. You have to get in touch with him. Maybe he will then invite you for the holidays. Uncle Bruno also wants to be back in October. Now, feel warmly greeted and write if the package is there. Love, Papa. This was the last letter before the war broke out. Alfred was stripped of all his assets and belongings and was deported to Terezin concentration camp from Berlin with the rest of the liquidation of Jews from Berlin in October 1942. He was murdered there in Terezin in May 1943.
Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah. Be'alma divra chirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'vyomechon, u'v'chaye dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'bizman kariv, v'imiru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam olamei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitpa'ar, v'yitromam, v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar, v'yit'aleh, v'yithalal, shemei dekudesha, brichu. Le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min Shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom v'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imiru. Amen.
The rise of Nazi Germany and the Nuremberg Laws are a stark reminder of how marginalization and the denial of basic human rights led to Auschwitz and the murder of millions of innocent people. It is a reminder we fail to heed at our own peril.